And then we'll have a chance to share how in our classrooms we're doing things to help promote those goals with children. Okay, I'm trying to get to the next slide. Here we go. So I want to start by introducing you to my family. So these are children that I raised. These children now are all young adults, but I want to start with this little one right here. This is my youngest daughter, Carissa. My children are German American, Mexican American, and have heritage in the Hopi tribe. And this is her cousin. This is my nephew, Fernando. Fernando is German American on my sister, his mother's side, and my brother-in-law immigrated from Venezuela. This is my niece, Vanessa. Vanessa is African American and Mexican American. And this is my niece, Amanda, who is Mexican American. And this is my niece, April. And April, her family identifies as Jewish by ethnicity, not by religion. So all of these children grew up together. They were together constantly. They went to the same schools, they were at the same houses, they were always together. Now my nephew Fernando, he was born on Christmas Day. So in our family, Christmas is a really big holiday, as our birthdays. We celebrate both in a big way. So we always wanted to be sure to celebrate Fernando's birthday, and we still do, early in December so that it's separate from Christmas. We can have both celebrations. So when Fernando was in kindergarten, we were at Chuck E. Cheese, and since he has a Christmas birthday, he was turning 6 years old, and we're at Chuck E. Cheese, and so Fernando looks over to his cousin Vanessa, and he says, Vanessa, what are you going to do for Kwanzaa? Vanessa looked at Fernando in confusion. She said, Kwanzaa, what's that? And then Fernando said, oh, Kwanzaa, that's where all Black people light candles right after Christmas. So Vanessa's thinking about this idea of lighting candles, and she's remembering what her teacher told her about Hanukkah and lighting candles. So she looks over to her cousin April and says, April, Fernando wants to know what you're going to do for Hanukkah. April looks at her and says, Hanukkah, we're Christian. So what ended up happening to these children who grew up with authentic diversity in their own lives, just they were born into this diversity. They had teachers who were very well-meaning, who created stereotypes. Fernando, who's now 6 years old, just turning 6 years old, was now believing all Black people celebrate Kwanzaa, even though he has a cousin who's just down the hall, a few doors down, who doesn't. And Vanessa's teacher, who wanted to make sure that she covered everything and was trying to be anti-bias, but in trying to be anti-bias was creating these stereotypes that all Jewish people celebrate Hanukkah. Louise Derman Sparks said that every child deserves to see herself in the classroom and evidence that her teachers understand what's important to her family. So what we're going to talk about in the beginning of this presentation is how to do that. How do we be connected to children's family? What is culturally responsive practice? So in culturally responsive practice, what we do is we learn about each child and each family, and we intentionally adapt and respond to each child's strengths and needs. There is not a one-size-fits-all approach. And teachers often try to do that in December because for many people, in December is our big holiday, Christmas. So we want to make sure that we include every December holiday. And we want to be very intentional and careful in the way that we present this to young children, because not every single child in an ethnic group or from a specific culture celebrates that holiday. We want to make sure that we recognize and address our own bias. When we're working with families, when we're working with children and we're getting to know these families and we're working on building these connections, we have bias and we need to recognize that and we need to address it. We're going to have many different family types in our groups of children. So say, for example, this is a bias that I had to address when I was on the floor with children. I had a little boy in my class, and he was 4 years old, and he lived with dad and stepmom. Well, dad and stepmom had been married for over 35 years, had raised children, their children were grown. Dad had had an affair, and this young boy was the result of that affair. His biological mother chose not to raise him, and so his stepmother and his father were raising him. Now, in my family, if that happened with my husband, he would be raising that child on his own. As much as I love young children, as much as I love my husband, that family structure would not work for me. So I had to remove that bias from my brain, because when I'm working with this child and with this family, that is their family structure. That is what they believe. You also need to pay attention to your classroom environment. What message are you sending to the children, to the families that are in your group? You really need to be intentional about how you prepare your environment and how you are sending this message. I worked for many years in a school that was in an Asian community, which was predominantly Korean American. And so what I did is I went to the Korean market that was at the corner, and I bought a whole bunch of Korean foods, boxes and cans. And I had no idea actually what this food was, but I put it in my family living area, and the children just loved it because that was the food that they use at home. So they were, whenever they were in that dramatic play area, they were using the same food that they were using at home. So it's little things like that that we need to pay attention to when we're setting up our classroom environment. We also want to make sure that we honor children and we honor their families. This is my good friend, Gerald. I met Gerald in 6th grade, and we're now both almost 60 years old, so we've been good friends for a long time. This is his husband, Sean, and these are these boys, their boys. This was their Christmas picture, I think about 2 years ago. So when a family is going to be entrusting their children with us, they ask questions of themselves, right? They want to know, will these people really know who my child is? Well, when we're looking at the Ray family, we see they've got a few things going on in their family. They are a biracial family. They are a family of gay parents, 2 dads. And you can kind of see it by Isaiah's expression, but Isaiah's a pretty busy little guy. And so when it came time for him to start preschool, Gerald and Sean were a little worried. They were a little worried that that the teachers in the classroom, that the other children may not really know who Isaiah is, because they were concentrating on his behavior, because he's really a busy little guy. They also, as many families, worried about, is our family life going to be respected? Our family doesn't look like what the norm family is, what the nuclear family is. We are 2 gay men raising 5 boys. We are a biracial family. We're Black and we're white. Our children are biracial. So having that dynamic going on, they're worried. Is my family going to be accepted? Are they going to know who we are? Are they going to respect us? And they're also asking themselves, am I going to be judged if my family misbehaves? I have 1 boy, 3 girls and 1 boy, and my son's 36 now, but when he was 4, he was a handful. And let me tell you, I worried that, especially being an early childhood educator, that the adults that were working with him might judge me on the way that he is behaving. So these are the questions that families ask themselves. So we really need to work on how we can build connections with each other. You really need to look at your group as your class as if they are a family. This is your classroom family. And think of ways that you can build connections with each other, because this is your family. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that you create a welcoming environment for everyone. It's that gut feeling that you get the minute that you walk in the door. Do I feel welcome here? And you want to make sure that every single family, every parent, every child that walks through that threshold and enters your classroom, that they feel welcome. And it's a gut feeling. You feel it the minute you walk in the door. When you're thinking about ways that you can connect, think about if the children and the families in your group, do they have anything in common? Find things that are common ground amongst everyone so that you can start to build those connections. When I was on the floor with children, I would do family meetings every month. And at the first family meeting of each school year, we would take some time to get to know everyone. And we used to make a quilt. So I would have each family make a quilt square that talked about who they were as a person, what was important to them. So maybe if music was important and they played the guitar, they might have a guitar in their quilt square. Or if they really loved, like me, to go to the ocean and be at the beach, they would draw something that represented the beach. And so what I would get on these quilt squares is we would see common threads along the line. Families that enjoyed going to the beach, families who enjoyed spending time at Disneyland, families who enjoyed going to the local park. And so they could start to make those connections right then from the very beginning, where the parents were making the connections. And then they would start to build play groups and do things with other families that had things in common with them. And when you have a new child or a new family coming into your classroom family, you want to work together to find ways that you can welcome them to your classroom family. One year when I was teaching 4-year-olds, it was 4 and 5-year-olds, it was their last year before kindergarten, and they were getting ready to move on to kindergarten, and we were talking about how they were going to go to kindergarten and they were going to be at a new school, and everyone was talking about the kindergarten that they were going to go to. Of course, they thought I was going to go with them, so we had to have those discussions. But one of the children asked, well, what's going to happen to the new kids who come here? And we had a big discussion. What the children decided to do was make a welcome book for the new children that were going to be coming in the following year. And they totally took control of it themselves. I gave them a digital camera. They took pictures of themselves. They took pictures of things in the classroom. And they narrated to these new children that were coming in the following year what they could expect coming into this classroom and building a new family. So of course, at the end of the year of those children that had received the book from the group before, they wanted to make the book for the next group. So it became this thing that we did. So we have quite a few people on the call right now. And I know that you all have great ideas of how you build connections with each other in your classroom. So what I'd like to do is just take a minute or two to, in the chat box, share some ideas of things that you do in your classroom, in your class family, with your children and families to build those connections. So I'll give you a few minutes to put in some of your ideas. And seeing some that are, we have a classroom book that we hold home pictures and family pictures that the family shares themselves along with the educator's photos. And photos of the teacher are placed throughout the environment in spaces showing themselves in play during tasks for them to use examples of reflections. We also print and laminate learning stories to place into the classroom for the children to access throughout the day in the book area. And then we have sharing our favorite things, teachers model, and then children each get their own day to share. How fun. Create a family tree. We hang family pictures on our family tree. Family photos on the walls, as well as photos of the children during the school day. Before school starts, we send a picture home of teachers to the children so they can see us. And we ask in families to send in a family photo. Every year I have my students with their families create all about me families, and I too and my aides create posters as well, and we share in our community circle. I provide various books of different cultures in the book area. We have family trees, family tradition celebrations, we share artifacts. Parents come and share cooking, books, songs, and dances. Each family makes a family portrait and posts them in the classroom after the child and our parents together share about their family. We video children during daily activities and share with individual parents. Family books, all about me walls, parent wish wall, and this year we will be doing a big focus on collaborative art projects so that when we return to in-person instruction, they will be able to see how they were working together, even from home versus sending individually created pieces of art. Parents come and share their talents, experiences, woodworking, cooking, sewing. Before COVID, we had a monthly family breakfast. Lots of pictures of children together and home pictures to share. We have a family board with families' pictures and pictures of their country or city where they grew up in to share. Multicultural books, clothes, and food. Each culture's alphabet in waiting area, and we use newspapers. So we're getting lots and lots of great ideas of how folks are out there in their classrooms building connections. So a lot of this is already happening. One of the things that I love about the way that we teach at PO is that we all learn from each other. It's not just somebody standing up here giving you all of the information. We all share because we learn together as a community. Before we go on, I just wanted to take a moment, Francisco, and see, did we have any questions from anybody?
Yes. So the first question is, how do we teach an anti-bias curriculum without being seen as indoctrination?
Okay, that's a really, really good question. And actually a little bit later in the presentation, we're going to really go deep into anti-biased education and what you can actually do in your classroom. We're going to look specifically at each of the 4 anti-biased goals, and then I'm going to give you some strategies, and we're going to share out strategies that we can use. So if you can hold off just a little bit towards the end of the presentation, you're going to get the answer to that question in good detail. Did we have any more?
Yes. Suggestions for building connections and creating a welcoming environment virtually.
See, and that's right now the thing we're going through, right? We're living through this COVID and everything is so different. And we want to make sure, because we're using screen time. So when we use screen time, we want to make sure that it's interactive and that we do something interactive with these children, especially the younger ones. The American Academy of Pediatrics, when they're talking about screen time, they really encourage that screen time is interactive. So it's really important that they see your face, and that and some of these same things, some activities and things that you're doing, you can do via Zoom, or you could have a private, I would suggest, if you're using YouTube, to have an unlisted YouTube channel so just your families can see it. But you might want to do some Zoom things where you have the families together or you have the children together, and you incorporate the same kinds of things that you would do in the classroom, maybe reading a story or singing a song or having a discussion about what people did over the weekend or what they ate for dinner or things that their family likes to do together. Because everything that we're doing now is so different because we're in this time of COVID and everybody's at home staying safe, right? So you're doing this virtually. So it's just a matter of trying to think in your head, how can I take what I would normally do in the classroom and do that virtually? And just the sky's the limit. Anything you would normally do face-to-face, you can do that virtually. Do we have any other questions that we could?
Yes, there's 3 more. One is, holidays seem to be a challenge in our program. How can we be inclusive without offending anyone? Do we celebrate the majority? Do we celebrate seasons?
This is such a great, great question, because this is the thing we hit right when we hit December every year. There's a really, really great book, and it's called, and I'm trying to think, I can vision the cover, it's blue, and I think it says Celebrating Holidays in an Anti-Biased Way or something like that. You could Google it, it will come right up. And the one thing that some people try to do is they like, you know what, we'll just pretend this is a holiday-free place. We won't celebrate any holidays and then we're covered. Or they say, you know what, we're just gonna try to get every single holiday so we cover it all. I think a really good idea is to find out what holidays the children in your classroom family celebrate, because you are a classroom family. And I wouldn't celebrate the majority. I would give everybody an opportunity to talk about the holidays that their family celebrates. And you want to pay attention to this throughout the year, not just in December, because Christmas is our big holiday and we celebrate that in December. Many people do. So we're thinking, oh, okay, well, Jewish people, they celebrate Hanukkah. Well, some Jewish families do celebrate Hanukkah, but Hanukkah is not their big holiday like Christmas is for us. So really getting to know what holidays families celebrate. It's all about getting to know the children in your class and getting to know your families and being respectful of that. And then in December, maybe you don't have any children of color, or maybe you don't have any African American children in your class, and it's December, you could talk about Kwanzaa and say, you know, there are some African American families, and at their house, this is what they do. So it's hard. It's such a tricky dance to play. Like, how do I cover it all? But what you really want to do is be respectful of the children that are in your class, but yet you also want to let them know that there is this world outside of our classroom too. And you said there were two more questions, Francisco?
Yes. So how would you suggest ensuring families of color are welcome in a classroom led by a white teacher?
That's a very good question. And I know I keep pushing to later in the presentation because we are going to talk about this later in the presentation. But you want to make sure that every single child feels welcomed in your classroom. And the big thing that I always get from my students and participants in my workshops is they always ask me about books. Like, what are some good books that I can use? And later in the presentation, we're going to be talking about that. But you want to make sure, if you have African American children in your classroom, that they feel just as welcome as any other child in your classroom. So a lot of that has to do with your environment. Earlier, when I was reading from the Chatbox people's ideas of how to build connections, they were talking about family walls and family trees and having family albums. And I've gone into classrooms when I go out to do the Eckers, and I'll see people, they want to make sure, because the Eckers says, you know, to see people of different ethnicities and people of different ableness to have pictures on the wall. So people go to school supply companies and they buy pictures of children, you know, and they post them. Those aren't the pictures that you post on your wall. The pictures you post on your wall are the children that are in your class, the families that are in your class doing normal, regular things. So those are the kinds of ways that we can help children of any ethnicity to feel welcome in our class. And was there one other question before we go on?
Yes. How do we invite families to share cultural, clothing, items, food without tokenizing?
Yeah, and that's the thing, is we don't want to tokenize, because, and I've seen that too, because I go out and I do the Eckers. For those of you who don't know what the Eckers is, it's the Early Childhood Environment Rating Scale. And it's where we look at what's appropriate in our environment and our interactions with children. And some of these things are in that scale. And I have gone into classrooms where they have this table where, okay, this month we'll do Chinese Americans. And then they have, you know, some Chinese stuff, or this month we're going to talk about Mexican American, and they have some Mexican stuff on that table. And that's what tokenism is. It's just like, we're just going to throw this out here so we got it covered, or we're going to throw some pictures up. We'll maybe throw a book in that has, you know, this. So to avoid tokenism and to have families really share, I used to have a community question board where each week I would ask a community question, and then the children would come in and the parents, and they would write the answer to the community question. And one of the things might be, what holidays do you celebrate? Or what traditions are important to your family? So I had one of my community questions was like, what traditions are important to your family? And one of my families, the parents were Aztec dancers. And so I invited them to come in. They came in their costumes, and I don't know if costumes is the correct word to use. They came in wearing their traditional clothing, and they did the Aztec dance for our children. So for their classroom family. So really finding out what matters to that family. I had, as I mentioned, I had a lot, because I worked for a long time in a Korean American neighborhood, and some of those Korean American families didn't bring in their culture. They really wanted the American culture, where I had other Korean American families who really wanted to share their Korean culture with the children. So a lot of it depends on the family. So it's really getting to know your families and asking those kinds of questions, and asking everybody. You know, I've been in schools where on the questionnaire that you fill out when you first enroll your child, is there anything that you would like to share with our classroom family? You know, and then I'd have families who say, oh, I want to come in and cook. This is our favorite meal, those kinds of things. So really just asking them, and then you get something that's authentic rather than something that's just a token. So are we good for questions, Francisco? Okay, I'm going to go on to the next slide. So this is a reflective activity. So what you're going to do is take some time. Nobody's going to see this but you, obviously. We're here in a webinar. I want you to take some time and sketch a floor plan of a high quality preschool classroom. It could be a classroom you worked in. It could be a classroom you've observed. This is going to be your dream classroom. This is your opportunity to create an ideal environment. It's not going to be something super, super fancy. It's going to be just a sketch of what you would want to include in this high quality classroom. What would your high quality classroom look like? What would be in that classroom? So I'm going to give you, it's 3:35, I think about 3 minutes. I'll give you about 3 minutes to just sketch out what you think would be in a high quality classroom. So I'll give you a few minutes to do that. And as you're doing that, I'm looking at things people have chatted. And remember, it doesn't have to be fancy. Just think about where maybe you would have your dramatic play area. Would there be a woodworking area? Would you have a book area? What kinds of things do you think would be important to have in this high quality classroom? I'll give you about 2 more minutes to think about all of the different areas. And while you're not doing a detailed drawing, think about the kinds of things you would hang on the wall. Think about the kinds of things you would have on a shelf or on a table. Think about how that would look in a very high quality classroom. We're going to have one more minute, and then we're going to do something with our sketch. So I'm going to give you one more minute. And I'm seeing in the chat box that people are helping each other out. That's one of the things that I love to see. Someone had asked a question in the chat box, what do you do if all of the children in your classroom are white? And somebody else said, hey, have you seen Louise Derman Sparks' book called What If All the Kids Were White? I love that, but she had the answer for them. Okay, it's just turning 3:38. So we're going to be looking at our sketch, but I want to draw your attention to the image that I have on the PowerPoint, because this is the best picture I ever took in my entire life. I have the cheapest phone that you could get, and I took this picture of my grandson's baptism with my cell phone. And this is in the Ethiopian culture, the baby is baptized on his 40th day. And I just absolutely love this picture of my grandson, Savion. He just looks amazing. And my daughter-in-law with her prayer cloth doesn't even look real. And the way the priest who was praying for this fertility baby for so long, holding his head, I just love this picture. So I want to have you look at the sketch of your classroom and think about all of the places where a children's family life and culture are reflected and nourished. Put a 1 in those places on your sketch where children's family life and culture are reflected and nourished. And some of you mentioned some of these types of things earlier in the chat box. I'm seeing people saying it would be in every area. We have, oh, somebody loves my picture. Where in your classroom would children's family life and culture be reflected and nurtured? The library area and the dramatic play area, mostly every area. Someone said the easiest place would be the dramatic play area. And that's usually what I get from folks, that the dramatic play area is the easiest place to do that. The family wall would be the perfect place to do that. Lunchtime, someone saying how we could anywhere and everywhere. And really that's the way that it should be. The child's family life and culture should be reflected and nourished anywhere and everywhere. But sometimes that's hard to do. So, getting ideas of where we can do that. I love, someone said outdoors too. At our children's school, we spend the majority of our time in the yard. And so you will see this outside too. On the rug is a community. So they would have time to talk about it when they're together. Books and blocks outside, etc. Puzzles, arts, puppets. In your online space too. Throughout the entire school. Okay, we're going to go to the next slide. So now we're going to look at our classroom again, and this time we're going to put a 2 in all of the places where children can find comfort when they're miss being with their families. This is something that we're really thinking about with our reopening of the children's school, and many of you who are going to be coming back are probably thinking about this too, because with the new COVID guidelines, the families aren't allowed to come in. So where can you put in your classroom environment where children can find comfort when they miss being with their families? And then put a 3 in all the places that remind children that they're going to be reunited with their families. So a 2 in all the places where children can find comfort when they miss being with their families. And a 3 in all the places that remind children that they will be reunited with their families. And then feel free to share any of these areas in your classroom in the chat box. A quiet time, a cozy area. Make sure to have a family picture for the children to have, pictures that they can carry around throughout the day. That really works well with young children. Quiet area near the cubbies, that's for the number 3. For number 2, the quiet corner, their cubbies. Our parents are never allowed to come in as this is a closed campus. So students keep their personal items in their cubbies. A comfort corner. They have a visual schedule where children can see what's going to happen during the day. I've seen lots of different ways that people have done a visual schedule. They take pictures of different parts of the day and then move the arrow along or move the pictures through the chart so that children can see that visually mom's going to come back. And this is really important during the beginning of school or when a child's just starting into your classroom so that they know that their parents are going to return. For the number 2, the quiet area under the loft. Number 3, group time, player circle time. We've got creating a family photo book for every child and include their families to help put it together. And you can have baskets all throughout the classroom where children can have their book placed so that they can pick it up whenever they want to look through it. Someone says, I like that idea of a peace corner. So the peace corner must have been listed up there. A peace corner is part of the reflective classroom, but anybody can do it. A visual schedule. Most areas, lots and lots of good ideas. I love how everyone is taking time to share this in the chat box. Okay, let's see. So connections continued. This is me and my mom. So put a 4 in all the places that the children's family members feel at home, relaxed, and respected in the room. And put a 5 in all the places where the children and their families can get to know more about and bond with you. I don't know if any of you have ever run into one of your children in CVS, but they look at you and they thought you lived at the school. And now all of a sudden your busiest child is hiding behind their mom's leg because you're in line at CVS and they thought you were supposed to be living at school, right? So where are places that the children and their families can get to know more about you and bond with you? And the 4 is where are the places that the children's family members feel at home, relaxed, and respected in the room. We've got a couch area. See, I've got a question in here that I will answer in a bit about COVID. Can you give some good examples for number 4? Because how are you going to do that? There's a teacher wall that has photos of the teacher's family and a teacher's bio. They have a couch area. They have a library area, the family wall, the library for number 4, circle time for number 5. So for the number 4, the places that children's family members feel at home, relaxed, and respected in the room. Kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, how when families walk in the room, they get that gut feeling right when they first walk in. Do they feel welcome? And for those of you that families do go into your classroom, in many of our Title 22 schools, families have to come in because they have to sign their child in. This is non-COVID time, regular time. And so it's nice to have an area that families can sit. In my classroom, I used to have an outside area where families could gather, and then I had an inside area where families could gather. And right near the sign-in area, I had a couch and a rocking chair and a basket of books and some pillows and a lamp and family pictures. And families could come and sit with their child, read them a story. Now, usually that space was used at pickup time because in the morning families were kind of rushed. I need to drop my child off. But they had more time when they were picking them up. You guys all had some great ideas of where the families and the children can get to know more about and bond with you. I love how someone said during circle time or during your gathering time, when you're always sitting with them and your group is together and you have that time when you can just talk. You know, you can talk about what you did over the weekend. You can talk about what you're going to do when you get home tonight and talk about who's in your family too. For the number 4, I had a question in the chat box that was about how do we do this during COVID? Because now that if your school is open or your school is going to be reopening, how are we going to welcome our families so that they feel at home, so they feel respected, so they feel relaxed? So since they can't come in, there's a few things that I've been thinking about. You could have an area near this sign-in area. I've been looking at several schools that have just recently reopened or about to reopen, and they have comfort areas where families can sit with their children as long as they need to before the child comes into the classroom. So that would help the family to feel at home, because a lot of families are worried, I'm bringing my child back, but I can't come in. And they're also worried about what's happening in that classroom because I can't come in. So I don't know what's going on in there. So think about ways that you can communicate with families what's happening in the classroom. When I was on the floor with children, I worked in a Reggio-inspired school for many, many years. For those of you who don't know what a Reggio-inspired school is, Reggio Emilia is a region in Italy where they practice social constructivism. And so at our school, we were a social constructivist school. And one of the things that we did is every morning, we used an emergent curriculum. So every morning we had our morning meeting and the children planned out their day, what they were going to do. Then they went and they implemented their plan. And at the end of the day, we came back together in our gathering area and we had a reflection time where we reflected on what we did during the day. And what I did after that reflection time is I created for the families every day a daily reflection. And it had pictures, it had words from the children that talked about what we did that day. So sending home something like that, pictures of what's going on in the classroom, maybe little short video clips, newsletters, and doing that way more frequently than we may have done before, because we are in this time of COVID and the families can't come into the classroom. So we want to make sure that they do feel at home, that they do feel relaxed, and they are respected, even though they physically can't get in the room. I was looking at the 5 and the places where the children and their families can get to know more about and bond with you. And it reminded me of something that happened when I used to work at the community college. So my husband also worked at the community college. And at that time, my son was a student at the community college. So all of the children would know if we were out on the yard and my husband walked by that that was my husband, and they would go and talk to him. And my son played the guitar, so we needed a break between classes. He would come and he would play the guitar and sing with the children. So the children knew this was my family, this was my husband, this was my son. So one day, one of my little guys comes into school so excited that he couldn't even talk. He's like, Teacher Judy, Teacher Judy, Teacher Judy. And I'm like, Isaiah, what? And he's like, I saw your son. And he's like, and I saw your husband, and they were together. He was just so excited that he saw my family together, because he had seen my husband, he had seen my son, he knew me, he saw pictures of my daughters. He just had never seen them physically together. And he was so excited that he couldn't even contain his excitement. I couldn't even get the words out of him. He was so excited. So that's an example of a way that the children in my class were able to bond and get to know me a little bit better. So you want to make a plan. So what if you're saying to yourself, you know what? I don't have too many examples from my own classroom that can keep children and families connected. What next? What do I do? So take some time. Think about your environment. Think about your daily routines. What are the changes that you would make that would help these families to feel connected and part of your group? Brainstorm your ideas and then work on a plan. Make it happen. Give yourself a timeline so you can keep track, and start with baby steps. It's not like you're going to wake up one day and all of this is going to happen. So this activity that we just did, it came from Curtis and Carter's book, Learning Together with Young Children. And I got it from the older version. They do have a second edition of this book. So I think this might be a good time to take a break and ask some questions. Francisco, do we have any questions in the Q&A box?
Yes. How do we support the child who faces cognitive dissonance of racism at home with parents or grandparents' racist views?
And you know what? It's a difficult thing to do, right? Because they're learning this at home, and at school we're accepting of everyone. So I have two examples that I'm going to give that happened actually in my own classroom. So in my classroom, many of you talked about having family albums and working together with the families to create these family albums. So I had a set of twins in my classroom, and they had two moms at home. So in the family album, there's a picture of the parents, the moms, getting married, having a wedding. So one of the children came to school one day and said, no, two moms cannot be married. That cannot happen, right? So we had a conversation, how, you know what, in your family, you believe that two moms cannot be married, but, and I almost said their real name, Mary and Susie's family, they do believe that two moms can be married. People can believe different things, but we can still all be friends, even though we believe different things. I had another child one time. I had an associate teacher who worked part-time for us in the morning, and then in the afternoon, she worked at Disneyland. So she's sitting on a table outside, and there's a group of children, and they're all drawing and talking to her and having this conversation. And one of the children looked at the teacher and said, "My mom says you work at Satan's land." So I'm standing to the side thinking, okay, how is this, is my associate teacher, does she have the words to address this with children? And she did such a beautiful job. She said, I work at Disneyland. I know in your family doesn't believe in the make-believe princesses. And at Disneyland, there's make-believe princesses. And so your family would never go there because you don't believe in those make-believe princesses. But other families do believe in make-believe princesses, so they like to go to Disneyland. And so she was respectful of that child's, family, that's what they, and I know she was worried as the other children are sitting there that they're all going to go home and say, teacher so-and-so works at Satan's land. She was worried about that. So you need to address what different belief systems are, but some belief systems are harmful. So you were talking about, the question was about like these racist belief systems. So how do you address that? It's really easy to address that we believe this and you believe this, and that's okay. We can believe different things and we can all be together. But what if what that family believes is outright racist, and that child is bringing that? I mean, in that case, you're not going to say, well, in your house, you believe this, and in our house, we believe this. In that case, that's when you're going to start to talk about being fair. And in a little while in the presentation, we're going to be looking at the anti-bias education goals. And one of them is all about justice, fairness, and then we're going to talk about advocacy. So we're going to talk about ways that we can talk to young children about being fair. So hopefully when we get to that point, it might answer your question a little bit better. Francisco, do we have any more questions?
Yes, it may not be related to the current topic, but the attendee was wondering if you will go over how to address current nursery rhymes that have a racial history.
We're going to talk a little bit about books, and I'm going to give you a website on social justice books. And that website, Louise German Sparks wrote a really, really great piece just about that, on choosing books, choosing songs, choosing nursery rhymes. And so when we get to that point in the slide, I'll give you that link, and then you can go and then read all about that. And then there's also some books you can choose. So that will help you with the nursery rhymes. Any other questions?
Yes, racism always raise bullying even among parents. How can teachers make deal with parents about bullying acts?
You know, and that is so hard to do, because a lot of times that's where racism stems from, right? It stems from the families passing that on to the children. The children, of course, see differences in color and differences, you know, in maybe language and things like that. But the part that comes that's a bad thing comes from the families. And sometimes those families are clashing against each other. One time I had two Chinese families in my class, and the one parent came up to me and said, I do not want my child socializing with that other child at all. I don't want them to sit with them. I don't want them to talk to them. Their family came from the wrong part of China, and they're not going to socialize with each other. So I really had to have, and it's like on the spot, right? First week of school, I get this. So I had to really think about, you know, take a breath and think about how I'm going to respond to that, because these parents are going to be against each other. And, you know, just have this conversation about how in our classroom and in our school, we are all fair, and talk about social justice, and let them know what our philosophy is and how it's going to come into play in our classroom, and that this is a safe place where everyone is safe. I also had families from India, and in India they used to have a casting system where families were born into different castes. And while they no longer have that system anymore, people are still, Indians from India are still very interested in which caste that family would have been born into. And so I would get that many times from families too, where they didn't want their child, they literally did not want their child to interact with another child because they would have been from a lower caste than them had they been in India back when they had the caste system. So lots of conversations, doing lots of family meetings. It's really important to have regular times where you can get together with families and talk about it, and really talking about what respect looks like in your classroom, what social justice looks like, how we're fair and accepting of everybody, and that this is a safe zone here in our classroom. These are really, really tricky issues, because many times it doesn't come from the children. Children notice it, children see it, but that attitude comes from somebody else. So going to the family and actually talking to them, and having, you know, workshops that maybe when you, if you can see that this is a problem, maybe addressing it, you know, having a special speaker come in to one of your family meetings or something like that. I was really fortunate that the school that I worked at, the family meetings were a requirement. So they needed to attend these trainings and family meetings, and then we could adjust the topics based on the needs that we have. Any other questions, Francisco?
Yes, so an attendee writes, in your example, the child's home belief was homophobic and therefore harmful. So how would you address that with them?
That's a good question. Now, it's homophobic, so it is going into almost, it's definitely a biased thing. So really letting the family and the child, letting the child know that everybody's family is different. Their families look different. Some families have two moms, some families have two dads, some families are, a grandma. And then you might want to talk to the family and let the family know, in our classroom, we have some families. Obviously, the family that said this to their child knows, because the child came home and said, hey, I looked through that family album and I saw that these two moms were getting married, right? So having that conversation with that family and letting them know, Susie came in today and she was talking, and she told the twins that their moms couldn't be married because they're two moms. And so I just want to let you know that this is what we said to them, because we're accepting of all families, of all children, of all people here at our school. So that could be a way that you could address that. Good question. Any other questions, Francisco?
Yes. Can you talk some more about supporting biracial kids?
And that is a hard thing to do, because I shouldn't say that's a hard thing to do. You can do it and it can be done. And you want to make sure that everybody feels accepted. I have, as you saw in my first slide, biracial children are part of my family. My grandson is a biracial. He's Ethiopian and he's German American. My children are Mexican American, of Hopi heritage, and of German American. So when you're getting to know the children and you're getting to know the families and you're starting to build these connections, you want to make sure that they are represented. Remember that first slide when we were looking at Louise Derman Sparks and how she said every child deserves to be represented in your classroom. And that doesn't just mean a token picture of a biracial child on the wall. A lot of this comes in the books that you have, in the activities that you do. Later in the presentation, we're going to be looking, I keep referring to these social justice books, but we're going to be looking at books. And I like how Dr. Grant mentioned in his presentation the Ezra Jack Keats books, because they're just regular stories. A snowy day, Whistle for Willie. Whistle for Willie was my daughter's favorite story when she was little because she couldn't whistle. So it's just a regular story that stars the main character is a child of color. So you want to make sure that throughout your library, throughout the stories that you share with children, throughout the materials that you have in your classroom, that you have that child's biracial heritage represented. The dolls that you have in your dramatic play area, you want to make sure that you have dolls that represent the children that are in your group. There's a book that I love, and now I can't remember the name of it, about little guy, and he's with his mom, and it's just, I think it will show up later in the presentation, but it's got different children and their different situations, and it's just an adorable little story, but it has the images, the characters of the books. Just a matter of fact, these are the characters in the books. You want to make sure if you have biracial children in your class that they are represented, not just by a token one something, that they are represented throughout your classroom, just like every other child in your class. Any other questions, Francisco?
Yes. So professionals argue racial issues is too soon to discuss in the field of ECE. Is this true?
That is definitely not true. Children notice color. Children see it right away. They know the difference. And I keep pushing off to when we're going to talk about those goals, we're going to look at that, and we're going to look about the colorblind approach that seems to be really comfortable and safe that people take sometimes when they're working with young children. And so we're going to get to that. We're definitely going to get to that. Any other questions?
Yes. Um, an attendee writes that they wonder if some families have the privilege of having more time to participate, share props than others, and if having families spearhead the representation of their holiday means certain families get heard more, or bear more responsibility of representing their minority culture, religion.
What a great, great point. Okay, our families are very, very busy, and they're juggling so much, and they have so much on their plates. And is it up to the families to make sure that their family is represented in your classroom family? No, it's not up to that family to do that. That's up to you. That's up to you to build these connections with these families, to discover what they believe, what they celebrate, what's important to them, so that everybody is covered. So it's really on the teacher to build those connections. Some families may be able to come in and they may be able to share things from their cultures. Other families may not. But if you know what they celebrate, how they celebrate it, what's important to them, then you can build that into your curriculum and your everyday experiences with the children. So it's not on the family to do it, it's on the teacher to ensure, be very intentional, to be very purposeful, to ensure that that family is represented. And if that family can come in and share, that would be fabulous. But if they can't, that's okay too, because everyone has really busy schedules, and sometimes families just cannot during the day get off and have time to come in and share with your classroom. And there's lots of other ways that you can get families involved in your programs. That's a whole other workshop though, but definitely teachers find ways to connect with those families so that you know what's important to them, so that you can make sure that that's represented in your classroom. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, so I think we're good. We're going to go on to the next slide. So when you're building these relationships with families, it's all about building trust and respect. When families first bring their children to school, it's a huge transition for both the parent and child. Think about your car. Think about your brand new car. Maybe it's not brand new 2020, but it's brand new to you. And now you're going to leave it with this stranger, and you're going to let that stranger drive it all they want, all day long, when you're not there. This is how these families feel even more, because this is more precious than their car. This is their precious child, right? So we can make that transition smoother when we work to build respect and trust. So we talked a lot about that earlier in this presentation. We had lots of good questions that helped about that. So we're not going to you could put it in the chat box for other people to see, but I just want you to take some time to think about what ways you can help the children and their families to get to know you, and strategies that you can use to get to know children and families. And we're just going to move a little bit forward. Now, quite a few of you asked questions that led me to talk about social justice books. So, and I get the question about books all the time. What books should I have in my classroom for young children? So Louise Derman Sparks has written a really great piece on how to choose anti-bias books, and it's on the Social Justice Books webpage, which is socialjusticebooks.org. So when you go to that webpage, you can look in book lists, you can look at all the kinds of different categories and ages, and you can get great, great books. And then you can also read the article that she's written on how to choose books that are anti-biased for young children. And one of the things that she recommends is that we keep in mind the power that books have. Earlier when we were listening to Dr. Grant, he talked about watching the Jetsons. And when he watched the Jetsons, because there were no people of color, he thought there were going to be no people of color in the future. So the books that we choose are powerful. If children don't see themselves or their family lives represented in the books that they're having in their classroom, then it's going to greatly impact their sense of self. And it's also going to impact the way that they treat others. So socialjusticebooks.org is where you can find her article about how to choose the books for your classroom. And there's a great, very extensive book list where you can click on different topics. Say you want to know about families, you can click on families. Or if you wanted to know about activism, you can click on activism. Or if you wanted to look for a specific culture, you can click on specific cultures. And there's tons and tons of books there as a resource. So since we're just finishing up talking about family structures, I was just going to share with you 3 books that are great for sharing these family structures. Loving Me is a board book, and it's written in Hopi and English. That's why I love it, because my children are of Hopi heritage. And it contains really, really great photographs of Hopi families, and they're just really, really good photographs. Then Leslie Newman wrote a book called Heather Has Two Mommies. And in the beginning, the book, it's where you're getting introduced to Heather, and her favorite number is 2, and she's all excited, and it shows all the things she likes to do. And then it's going to be time for her to go to school. So on the first day of school, the children read a book about a veterinarian, and then that sparks a discussion amongst the children on what do your parents do? And so what the children do is they draw family pictures and they start talking about their family structures. And it's just a relaxed, matter-of-fact atmosphere of, here are these kids, they're at school, and they're talking about their families and what they do. And then the story ends with mommy's come and pick her up, and she talks about how she had a great day at school. And it's just a really nice book that has this family structure in it, but it also includes other family structures. But Heather is the main character in the book. And then The Big Bed by Bumby Landit. This book I love. It's a little girl, and she's an African-American girl. And she comes up with a solution to get daddy out of the big bed because she wants to sleep with her mommy. And so she has a cot for daddy. And she even at one point tells him, isn't grandma your mommy? Maybe you can go to grandma's and sleep with her. So it's a really, really great story, but even any child can put themselves as the character in that book. Nobody's given a name, and it is African-American family, but any child can relate to the storyline. So I want to transition a little bit and talk about developmentally appropriate practice. So those of us in early childhood are very familiar with the National Association for the Education of Young Children, NAEYC, and NAEYC promotes developmentally appropriate practice. And what developmentally appropriate practice is, it's a framework of principles and guidelines for best practice in the care and education of young children birth through age 8. So it's not curriculum like this is step by step what you're going to follow. It is a framework. And one of the key tenets of developmentally appropriate practice is being intentional. Good teachers are intentional in everything they do. Setting up your classroom, planning your curriculum, making use of different various teaching strategies, assessing children, interacting with them, and working with their families. So we really need to be very intentional and purposeful in everything we do. Oftentimes, when we think about developmentally appropriate classroom, the first thing that we think about is curriculum or environment. That's what we think. Okay, how am I going to set up my classroom? What am I going to do for curriculum? But before you can start thinking about curriculum and environment, you need to think about relationships. Relationships are the glue that bind us all together. We need to have these strong relationships. If we don't have relationships, how are we going to set up our environment? How are we going to know these children, these families? How are we going to plan a curriculum that is geared to where these children are developmentally, right? So what I want us to do for a minute is consider that standard relationships. And think about, what can a classroom teacher do, especially at the beginning of a year? Kids are just, this is going to happen right now. Kids are just going to be coming back to school. What can that classroom teacher do to build relationships? For now, we're just going to think relationships. What can I do to build relationships? I'll give you a few minutes to put in the chat box things that you could do in your classroom to build relationships. I'm getting lots of great books showing up in the chat books, chat box. I love how somebody said, be authentic. Be authentic when you're building those relationships. Be yourself. Someone else said we do home visits, going in actually to the family's home. They have all about me posters. Smile, be approachable. I was with some children at our children's school the other day, and everyone had on masks. And I was letting the children know that even though we have on a mask, we can tell when someone's smiling, because when they're smiling, their eyes smile too. And so getting down at their level, being approachable, smiling makes a big difference. Oh, that's what somebody said. Get to the child's eye level. Let's see. They're going to do Zoom meetings this year. Individual greetings, making sure that you greet everybody. Introduce to the families. Ask about activities they do like a family. Be polite. Spend one-on-one time with each child. That is so important in building relationships and getting to know each child, is to find time to spend with each child. Greeting children by their names. I worked in a campus lab school for a long time, and my student teachers would use endearments a lot. Honey, sweetie. It's really important to use children's names. We're going to talk about names in a little bit. Find out each child's interests. When we're looking at social constructivism, we plan our curriculum based on children's interests. So finding out. Someone else said, finding out parents' names. And that's really, really important, that you're greeting the parents by their name instead of mom or dad. Try to use your regular voice instead of a baby voice. We're talking to children just in a normal, everyday kind of way. Get to know the children's names and their interests. Greet parents with a smile when they arrive. We can ask children how they enjoyed their holidays. Eye-to-eye talk. It means that you respect each other. Meet and greet and be very welcoming and assuring. Play the name game for parents and students when you first meet all of your students and families. Ask them how they are feeling. Really, really great ideas people are sharing. I want to talk a little bit about connection. This is my granddaughter, Sadie, and Dr. Becky Bailey talks about 4 critical elements of connection. And some of these you guys have already had in the chat box there. Eye contact, presence, touch, and playfulness. So I want to talk about eye contact. It's really, really important when you're talking to young children that you have eye contact. When we actually have eye contact, our brains are actually connecting. As soon as you have eye contact, you're mirroring neurons in your brain that they're seeing the emotions on your face, and they could have the same feeling within themselves. Eye contact is so important. Presence. We really want to be present and in the moment. In this day and age of cell phones, I see so many adults who are not present and in the moment with that child. Being present means that your mind and your body are in the same place. The present moment is where your joy is. Relax into it. Be present. Touch. I have had students tell me that in their school, they're not allowed to hug children. They're not allowed to have children on their lap. They're not allowed to hold children's hands. Touch is the only sense that we can't live without. If we didn't have touch, we would not be able to live, because your skin and your brain are made up of the same tissue. Your skin's your outside layer of your brain. So touch creates that hormone that's essential to our functioning and our learning. We want to have smart, happy kids, so we need to provide lots of appropriate, caring touch and playfulness. It's really, really easy for our male teachers. When you see them out on the floor, you see them playing and interacting with those kids. It's important that we all do that. Connection requires those 4 critical elements: eye contact, presence, touch, and playfulness. So I was going to sing this myself, but I'm going to play for you Red Grammer's song, I Think You're Wonderful, and it's from his Teaching Peace CD. You can sing along if you want.
I think you're wonderful. When somebody says that to me, I feel wonderful, as wonderful can be. It makes me want to say the same thing to somebody new. And by the way, I've been meaning to say, I think you're wonderful too. When we practice this phrase in the most honest way, find something special in someone each day. We lift up the world one heart at a time. It all starts by saying this one simple line. I think you're wonderful. When somebody says that to me, I feel wonderful, as wonderful can be. It makes me want to say the same thing to somebody new. And by the way, I've been meaning to say, I think you're wonderful too. When each one of us feels important inside, loving and giving and glad we're alive. Oh, what a difference we'll make in each day, because someone decided to say, I think you're wonderful. When somebody says that to me, I feel wonderful, as wonderful can be. It makes me want to say the same thing to somebody new. And by the way, I've been meaning to say, I think you're wonderful too. And by the way, I've been meaning to say, I think you're wonderful too.
I thought about singing it just by myself, but I thought I would have Red sing it for us. It's so important that children feel connected, that we build relationships with them, that we build relationships with our families, that we use culturally responsive practice. And using music and using books are such a great way to do this. When my grandson Savion was born, he was just about an hour old the first time I saw him. He was born on a holiday, thank goodness, because my son sent me a text about 9 o'clock in the morning and said, we're on our way to the birthing center. So I'm thinking, oh, good, I can get dressed. I have some time. 9:05, he sent me a picture of the baby. So he was almost born in the car. So as soon as I got there, and he was just about an hour old, and I held him in my arms, this is the first song that I sang to him after he was born. Of course, I sang to him when he was in the womb, and I read to him when he was in the womb. But this was the first song I sang to him. And now at 18 months old, this is his favorite song. And when you sing this song, it gives people that warmness in their heart. I remember one time I was up in the middle of the night. I was working on a budget. I was an administrator, and it was probably 2, 3 in the morning. I was so tired. And my husband's like, I told him, go to bed, go to bed. He said, no, I'm going to stay with you while you're doing this. And so he came up behind me at the desk and he was rubbing my shoulders. And as he was rubbing my shoulders, I sang this song to him, and just the look that came on his face. So even adults feel great when they feel like you're connected. So now that we know about how to build connections, how to build relationships, let's talk about what is anti-biased education. Anti-biased education is a way of teaching that supports children and their families as they develop a sense of identity in a diverse society. So that's what we have been talking about so far, is really developing that sense of identity. So I want to talk just a minute about stereotypes. I'm just going to give you Professor Derman-Sparks' definition of a stereotype. She defines a stereotype as an oversimplified generalization about a particular identity group. It could be gender, race, ethnicity, class, sexual orientation, ability, or disability, any particular of an identity group, which usually carries a derogatory, inaccurate message and applies them to all people in the group. So we want to make sure that in trying to be anti-biased, we don't become biased by adhering to stereotypes. So I want to talk a minute about the colorblind approach, because many people, this is their go-to because it's safe. And so they'll say things like, I don't see color. Every child is a child to me. Everyone is the same. And people have a mindset in this approach that children don't see differences. And if we don't talk about them, then the children aren't going to notice. You know what? The children do see differences, and they do notice. So we do need to talk about it. In the colorblind approach, people think, they have this belief that if we do bring up differences, then that's going to cause children to be prejudiced. And it's safe. So it's our go-to. This colorblind approach is our go-to. But in anti-biased education, we use a social justice approach. It helps children to be proud of themselves, to be proud of their families. It helps children to respect a range of human differences. It helps children to recognize unfairness and bias. And it helps children to speak up for the rights of others. So I'm going to just review a little bit the goals of anti-biased education that we saw in Dr. Grant's presentation. Goal 1 is identity. And that's where teachers are going to nurture each child's construction of knowledge. And we want children to be confident, individual, personal, and their social identities. And children would demonstrate self-awareness, confidence, family pride, and positive social identity. So that's goal number 1, identity. Goal number 2 is diversity. That's where teachers promote each child's comfortable, empathetic interaction with people from diverse backgrounds. And children express comfort and joy with human diversity. They use accurate language for human differences, and they have a deep, caring human connection with others. The third goal is justice. Teachers are going to foster each child's capability to critically identify bias And the teachers are going to nurture each child's empathy for the hurt that bias causes. And the children are going to increasingly recognize unfairness. They're going to have language to describe unfairness, and they're going to understand that unfairness hurts. And the last goal is activism. That's where teachers are going to cultivate each child's ability and confidence to stand up for themselves and to stand up for others in the face of bias. And the children will demonstrate empowerment and the skills to act with others or alone against prejudice and or discriminatory actions. So these are the 4 goals of anti-biased education. So let's look at goal 1. That's where each child's going to demonstrate the self-awareness, confidence, family pride, positive social identities. So we talked a lot about ways that we could help to build relationships, that we could build connections. So let's dig a little bit deeper. Let's think about how you can help each child to demonstrate self-awareness and confidence. And how can we foster family pride and positive social identities with the children in our group? So we're going to go a little bit deeper and think about what you can do to help the child to demonstrate this self-awareness and confidence, and how we can help that family to be proud and have positive social identities with all of the children in our group. So I'm going to give you some time to share your ideas of maybe something that you already do in your classroom to promote this, or something that maybe is an idea that just popped in your head through this presentation of how you can promote this. So I'll give you some time to put it in the chat box. Got dramatic play clothes that represent different families. Family sharing in the classroom and family portraits shared. The child brings in a poster board of pictures of their family. Oh, I like this one. Make building blocks out of shoe boxes that are covered in family photos. How fun is that? Share different cultures' recipes. The parents send in the story of my name, and we share these stories at circle time. We're going to talk a little bit about names in a minute. Ask a child to bring an item from home to share and why it's special, or bring a photo that's special to talk about in class. Family connection projects. We'll do just a few more. Share different cultures' musical instruments. That's a nice one. Make laminated placemats decorated by the child and covered with family photos. Different kinds of books. A family journal and picture section where they share photos and stories from important events, traditions, or what they do at home. And if they cannot, families email us the pictures and a blurb, and we put it up for them. Great ideas. We've a lot of people in this workshop today. We could look at a lot. I want to talk a little bit about identity and what's in a name. So my name is Judith Ann. When I was growing up, that's what I was called, Judith Ann, like Mary Ann or Anne Marie. My name was Judith Ann. It still is Judith Ann. So I get to kindergarten, and the teacher sees that my name is Judith, and so she calls me Judy. So I go home that day and I tell my mom, you know, Mom, now my name is Judy. My mom says, no, your name's not Judy. Your name's Judith Ann. Go to school and tell your teacher your name's Judith Ann. Well, I didn't. My school name was Judy. My home name was Judith Ann. And then by about 3rd grade, my identity was wrapped up around the name Judy. I prefer to be called Judy. either Judy or Judith Ann. Don't like Judith. Either Judith Ann or Judy. But that's my identity now. That's my name. My youngest daughter, her name is Carissa. I flat out stole her name. I was teaching kindergarten, and a little girl in my class had a baby sister. They named her Carissa. The next year I had a baby. I named her Carissa. And then that family moved to our school district. And that other Carissa was a year ahead of my daughter all through school. So when she was little, she was born in 1990. So when she was little, there was a show on TV called Clarissa Knows It All. So everybody started calling her Clarissa instead of Carissa. And then now, whenever she goes to Starbucks, she said, you know, I should legally change my name to Teresa because everybody calls me Teresa. But her name is Carissa. So that's her identity is wrapped around her name. My nephew, Yvonne, his dad, my brother-in-law, is from Venezuela. My sister is German-American. So when their older son, Fernando, was little, they talked to him, both of them talked to him in Spanish and English all the time. So he talked Spanglish. So they thought, okay, with Yvonne, what we'll do is one of us, my sister, will talk to him in English. And then the other one, my brother-in-law, Fernando, will talk to him in Spanish so that he can learn English and Spanish. So in English, they pronounced his name Yvonne. And in Spanish, they pronounced his name Yvonne. So I was talking to my sister when he was little, and I said, you know, this is going to be really confusing for him because he's hearing two names, Yvonne and Yvonne. How is he going to know what his name is? And she said, well, you know what? When he's old enough, we'll let him decide what he wants to be called. So when he was about 18 months old, you asked him what's his name, and he would say Vaughn, because that way he made his interpretation of these two names. Now as an adult, he uses the English pronunciation Ivan. So I'm still getting used to it. I'm used to calling him Ivan. Then I have another nephew, Timmy. And Timmy's name is Guy Timothy. So that would be now as an adult, when he writes his first and middle name, he would write Guy T. DeMarco. So he told me one time, he's like, you know what, Aunt Judy, I wish people just knew that my name was Timothy. I wish there was a way that I could just have people call me Timmy instead of calling me Guy. And I told him, you know what you could do, Timmy, whenever you're filling out forms, when it says your first name, just put your first initial, and then when it says your middle name, instead of putting your initial, write out Timothy, and then people will call you Timothy. And so he started to do that. So now he writes G. Timothy DeMarco. His name, he likes to be called Timmy, and then at work, I think people call him Timothy. So our names are so important to our identity. It's so important that we are respectful of people's names and learn how to pronounce it correctly. So there's a book, it's called The Name Jar. And earlier in the presentation, I saw in the chat box, someone had recommended this book. So the book is about a young Korean girl who just comes to America, and she's just about to begin her first day of school in America. And she's really worried that her classmates aren't going to be able to pronounce her name. So on the first day of school, when they ask her what her name is, she says, you know what, I haven't decided my American name yet. We're going to work together as a class to figure out what my name is. And all the children put different names in the name jar, and she looks at it, oh, am I Amanda? Am I, you know, so she tries a few out, and she realizes, you know what? She already has the perfect name. And she lets everybody know, my name is Yoonhae. And of course the children can pronounce it. So your name is really, really central to your identity. I'm going to talk a little bit now about goal 2. So I was visiting a local school and looking at their outdoor classroom. I was just getting ready to do an outdoor classroom workshop, and I wanted to take some pictures of the outdoor classroom environment to add to my presentation. So the director gave me a little name tag that said Judy Photos, so that whenever I was walking around, then the teachers would know it was okay for me to take pictures. I was taking pictures of the environment. So as I was walking around taking these pictures, there were some little girls that are following me around and they're talking to me, oh, what are you doing? And we were talking about, you know, how I'm taking pictures so that other teachers can see what you do at your school. And so they were starting to feel a little bit comfortable with me because we were having these conversations as I was taking the pictures. And so they just asked me, why do you walk funny? And so they felt comfortable asking me that question. Well, I have a degenerative spine disease, and most of the time it's fine and I walk great. But when it's really, really wet or it's been raining for a really long time, I do walk funny. So I was able to talk to these children and say, oh, you know what? A long time ago, when I was in a car accident, I hurt my back. And sometimes when it rains, like it did last night, the next day I walk a little funny. So I just answered their question and had that conversation with them. But so often what we hear happening is if a child wants to ask a question like that, you know, the mom will say, shh, don't say that too loud. Or a child says, what's wrong with him? Or where's his other arm? There's this belief out there that we should only focus on what's the same about people, that we shouldn't talk about differences, that if we talk about differences, that it's going to lead to prejudice. And we really, children notice differences. We can't ignore differences. Everybody is different, right? Children learn prejudice, not from learning about human diversity. It's how people respond to differences that teaches bias and fear. So if somebody was telling those children who asked me, why do you walk funny? Shh, don't ask her, don't talk to her, don't say that too loud, right? Then that's teaching them that there's something wrong with someone who walks funny or who's a different color or who's obese. These kinds of things we want to talk about. So goal two is each child will express comfort and joy with human diversity and use accurate language for human differences and have deep, caring human connections. Goal 3 is all about justice. Each child will increasingly recognize unfairness, and they'll have that language to describe unfairness and understand that unfairness hurts. So I'm going to have you share in the chat box some of your ideas of what you can do to help children to recognize what's fair and how you can help them understand that unfairness hurts. So I'll give you a few minutes. Some of your ideas. Maybe this is something that you've done in a classroom. Maybe this is something that now that we're having this conversation, you've got this idea that's sparked in you. So let's take a moment to share in the chat box ideas of what you can do that are going to help children to recognize what's fair and to help them understand unfairness hurts. I see have drawings in the classroom where it promotes fairness for young children. Fairness is everyone gets what they need. Let's see if we get some more ideas. Have children come up with rules or a social contract for classroom. Use learning stories or real situations to talk about fairness. Sharing versus caring role play. Help children understand equity. Yes, everyone gets what they need. That's a response to one of our earlier responses. Talking about them, about their friends' feelings. Role playing. Using counters or popsicle sticks in class to keep track of equal access to certain materials or activities or participation. Use puppets in role play or stories. I introduce the children's work and have them ask questions about the work presented. Someone just bought a brand new book called Fair Shares, super cute. Using persona dolls. And then here's another one, using persona dolls to teach and discuss issues and have children come up with a solution. Teach kindness. So we have a lot more coming through, but we're getting a little bit short on time, and I want to talk about the last goal that we have. So tying it all together in anti-biased curriculum or anti-biased education is goal 4. And that's activism, and that's empowerment. And when we think about young children and we think about preschool, Oftentimes, we think that children can't be activists. Children can't do this. Young children can't. But young children can. When they start to understand about fairness, the next step is to help them to be empowered so that they can stand up against prejudice. They can stand up against discriminatory actions. We need to empower them to be able to do that. So the last thing that we're going to do before I open the floor for more questions is I'm going to have you share some ideas in the chat box on things that you do in your classroom that help to empower children. Maybe it's something that you haven't done before. Maybe hearing all of this and hearing other people's suggestions, you're getting ideas now that you can empower children. So let's see what some people are saying. Giving all children the opportunity to speak. Have children lead activities. Accept their boundaries. Validate their feelings. Give them all jobs. Always give them a chance to speak. To stand up for their rights. When a child sees an unfair act, to speak up and be heard. I love this one, model the conversation, because sometimes they don't have the words. You can help them with the words and have the two children, especially if, a lot of bullying sometimes happens. And when the two children, you can get the two children that were involved in that bullying together, and you can empower that child that was bullied to stand up for herself by giving her the words to say, because she may not have those words to use her big voice to say it, but we can empower them to do it. I love this one. Allow children to take turns to teach. Support difficult conversations by being the mediator and model language. Share the same language used at school with families so that they can use that same language at home. Respect them. Use consent and don't insist they share. Talk through problem solving. And then the last one I'm going to share is especially important to balance that conversation with respect, because that's what it's all about. It's all about respect. So we're getting close to the end of our time, so I'm going to open up the floor for any questions. Francisco, do we have any questions?
Yes. So an attendee is asking that they wanted to talk about the myths regarding autism and eye contact. The reason some children don't make as much eye contact is because it's overstimulating, and that they tended to so offer, but forcing eye contact is more traumatic than healthy for development. Do you have any advice for being mindful about providing the option for eye contact without forcing or imposing neurotypical expectations?
Very, very good question. I have a little guy in my Sunday school class who is autistic, and he is very, very low functioning autistic. He has no speech. He's very sensory. And while I teach 4-year-olds, he's already 7, but he's still in my group because Sunday school is a volunteer and not everybody knows how to work with children with special needs. So you really need to get to know the child. This is where that building connections and relationships is important, because autistic children are so sensitive to different things, and a lot of it depends on the child, and it might depend on the level of the spectrum that they're on. Some children are very, very sensitive to light. The little guy in my class, that when we have class, we have the light off because it's too bright for him. So it took me years, I've been working with him for years, to work on having eye contact with him, because in the beginning he would always look away but now he's starting to look more towards me. So when you have children in different levels of the spectrum, you really need to be respectful of where they are and find ways that you can connect with them. Because touching for them, it depends on the level of the spectrum. Sometimes touching can really, really bother them to have that touch. Sometimes if you're too close with the eye contact, that could set them into an episode. Depending on the level of spectrum, some children like to have that eye contact, when usually with autistic children, we don't see generally eye contact at all, but some children do have that eye contact. So because you want to be respectful of that child and their needs, you want to think about ways that you can connect with that child that may include other things besides for that direct eye contact. It might be the tone of your voice. It might be the way that you present things. And a lot of that is going to come from building those relationships and getting to know that child and what it is that's going to set him off and what it is that's going to help him to feel connected. Do we have another question?
Yes. How can teachers create a welcoming environment for LGBTQ families? Also, can teachers get trained in this topic?
Yes, teachers can get trained in this topic. There's lots and lots of trainings that are available, and there's lots of books that are available. And when you go to the socialjustice.org, or I can't remember, socialjustice.org, or the one that I had earlier, the social justice website, and you have the book lists. There's also books for teachers. And so you can pick that as a category, and there'll be a list of books that you can read to help to train yourself. So I addressed the first part of that question. The second part is making that classroom environment feel welcoming to that family. So all of the things that we talked about in the beginning when we were talking about being culturally responsive and building connections and relationships with families and children, you're going to do that for all of your families, regardless of their sexual orientation, their ethnicity, their culture. So having pictures of their families. Many of you talked about having family walls, having family trees, having family albums, having poster boards. So this family is going to be welcomed. Having books, all of the books that you have in your classroom, you want to make sure that your books include the families that you have in your class, as well as other groups of people. Again, that website will give you a nice list, a book list of books that you can use, because you want to ensure that every child, every family feels welcome the moment they walk in your door. Any other questions, Francisco?
Yes. How do you teach fantasy play with young children where it doesn't bring about the Disney princess and heroes?
Very, very good question. Think about your dramatic play area. Oftentimes I've been in schools and I go in the dramatic play area and there's all of these Cinderella costumes and the Disney, I can't think of the other ones, Belle and all of that. So rather than having that in your dramatic play area, think about, what if I just had material? What if I had strips of material? You want to make sure that you don't have any of those Disney books in your classroom, that you have books that if you're talking about princesses. And now I talked earlier about how I worked in a Reggio inspired school, and in Reggio inspired schools, what we do is children work on projects and they work in project groups. And I had a group one time that was very, very interested in princesses. So what we did is we actually did research with 4-year-olds on what are princesses, what is a prince, what is a king, what is a queen, looking at the real royal family, looking at real princesses, rather than this fairy tale of a princess. So that's very helpful when you do things like that. Bring it, if you see that children are interested in princesses, talk about princesses, look at it, say, oh, I see you're interested in princesses. Was there really a Cinderella? Let's see. Oh, it was a story that somebody made, find out the history of that story, that folktale, and talk about that. Are there really princesses? Oh, you know what? In Great Britain, there is a real princess. Oh, you know what? This princess is little like you know, that kind of thing. So bringing in what's real rather than what's make believe. But of course, children are still going to pretend. We don't want them to not have make believe play. We just want to try to guide it and lead it in a way where it's based on something that's more realistic. Just like when they're playing and they're playing that I'm mommy and I'm daddy, or I'm the grandma who's feeding the baby. I'm, you know, Princess Beatrice from you know, Great Britain, that kind of thing. Any other questions? We have just a few minutes left.
Yes, how can we approach parents hesitant to discuss difficult subjects of racism and prejudices, and not that they do not want to expose their children to the harsh realities seen in our society to preserve their innocence?
This is real life. You know, we're talking about what's real. Their children are seeing it. Remember when we talked about that colorblind approach, people think that they can protect their children, that their children won't see it. The children are going to see it. They're going to see that people are different colors. They're going to see that people are able differently. They're going to see people have disabilities. They're in the world. They're alive and living right now. Right now, we try to limit the news. I'm sure everyone's trying to limit the news as much as possible for their children, but their children are aware something's going on right now. You know, so we can't hide it from them, but we can present it to children in a way that's developmentally appropriate. And a lot of that training for families is really letting families know that we're going to talk to children in appropriate ways and giving them resources that help them to be able to do that. We're at 4:57, so I think I have time for one last question.
Yes, you talked earlier about family meetings. How do you recommend planning and facilitating meetings? What topics might be shared in these meetings?
Okay, so I like to do, when I was on the floor with children, we had a family meeting at least once a month. So my first family meeting was led by me, talking about how young children learn, building connections, that kind of thing. And at the end of the first family meeting, there was a questionnaire asking the families what kinds of topics they would like to discuss at future family meetings. And we could have guest speakers come in. So we were really addressing the family's needs. Now, our family meetings were a lot different than, say, like family participation, where we had snow day and the snow came in. That isn't a family meeting. A family meeting where it's a time for families to talk about what's important to them. So really questioning the families, surveying them, seeing what are they interested in, and cover those topics. And also you can add topics like, right now, this is what's going on in the world. So your family meeting might be about racial injustices, and that might be your topic, and you have an expert come in and talk about that. And then maybe next time you'll talk about getting ready for kindergarten. So looking at what they're interested in, but also looking at what's happening in the world today in addressing those topics in your meetings. I feel like our time went really, really fast. So I'm leaving you with my email. Again, my name is Dr. Judy Krause. I'm here at Pacific Oaks. My email is jkrause@pacificoaks.edu. And if you have any more questions, I don't care if my email is bombarded. Just send them to me and I'll be happy to answer them. And if I can't answer them, I will lead you to where you can find those answers. Thank you so much for attending today. I hope that you got some great ideas. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to come to me.